the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend, Indiana. The story of the faith in this region began with the travails of French missionary priests. It came of age with the establishment of one of the great Catholic universities in America, and carries on today under the leadership of its current apostle, Bishop Kevin Rhoades.
The bishop is as a successor of the apostle, so that he has the fullness of that ministry. It requires a recognition, of course, that this is all by God's grace. This is the gift of the Holy Spirit.
This is the story of the bishops of America, the shepherds of the past and the shepherds of today, who through their callings and ministry carry the church into the future. It's also the story of their parish, their church, the cathedral. This is The Chair, an exploration of what it means to be an apostle in America. The city of Fort Wayne is situated on flat land in northeastern Indiana, 18 miles west of Ohio and 50 miles south of Michigan.
The Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend encompasses 14 Indiana counties in northeastern Indiana. The city of Fort Wayne derives its name from a U.S. military fort established in 1794 by General Anthony Wayne. Built where the St. Joseph and St. Mary's rivers come together, this region was originally the capital of the Miami Nation.
The seeds of the Catholic faith in the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend were planted early on by the missionary priests who came from French Canada down into Quebec. They were hoping to convert the native peoples, but eventually they established a presence to minister to the Catholics who had settled in the regions, farmers, trappers, other pioneers. And they started to establish the institutions that would later grow into a settled Catholic presence in the region.
The Bishop of Quebec held jurisdiction over the region until the establishment of the Diocese of Baltimore in 1789. In 1808, it became part of the newly established Diocese of Bardstown. In 1834, Pope Gregory XVI erected the Diocese of Vincennes, which comprised the entire state of Indiana and the eastern third of Illinois. Simon Brute was consecrated as the first bishop of Vincennes.
One of the things that Bishop Brute was noted for was that he served as a spiritual advisor to St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. President John Quincy Adams also once referred to him as the most learned man of his day in America. Around this time, serving along with Bishop Brute was a priest by the name of Father Stephen Baden. In 1832, he purchased 524 acres containing 2 spring-fed lakes in northern Indiana and built a cabin by one of the lakes, and he named the property Saint-Marie-de-Lac. It was really unknowingly the seed of the University of Notre Dame.
Catholicism in South Bend has largely been defined by its relationship to the University of Notre Dame. The university had its beginnings when a 28-year-old French priest, along with 7 brother priests from the Congregation of the Holy Cross, took possession of the 524 acres of land to build a college.
Here was an institution founded by missionary French priests who saw it as part of the work of evangelization. Over the years, that university would be transformed by waves of immigration, and French missionary priests suddenly became the Irish, calling attention to the remarkable contributions that Irish-American immigration brought to the United States, and especially its role in building up institutions that would help nurture the faith. And today, the university is no longer something that's simply the possession of European immigrants, but it reflects the remarkable diversity of a global faith. It's a center of learning that attracts the best and the brightest of faculty and students from across the United States and throughout the world.
In 1857, the Diocese of Fort Wayne was created with John Henry Lewis as the first bishop. The French-born priest, Father Julien Benoit, marshaled supporters and finances to build a cathedral worthy of the diocese. The cornerstone for the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception was placed on June 19, 1859, and it was dedicated a year later.
The early history of the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend had a French flair that eventually gave way to a more German-centric character with the changes in the Catholic population and the Catholic leadership in the diocese. And the early bishops in the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend, particularly in the Fort Wayne region, fortified that German presence by inviting in German priests to minister to the German Catholic community, but also communities of women religious like the Poor Handmaids of Jesus Christ, who came to the diocese to work with those immigrant communities and establish educational institutions and healthcare institutions, the schools and hospitals that were vitally necessary for the growing Catholic community to care for their own.
Another notable educational enterprise from the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend was the establishment of Our Sunday Visitor in 1912 by Father John Knoll. Father Knoll recognized the great need to promote the faith and educate members of the diocese in the faith. Father Knoll established Our Sunday Visitor in response to the anti-Catholic attitudes that he found in Indiana at the time. Our Sunday Visitor started out publishing a newspaper, but also pamphlets and educational materials. By the post-war period, it became a national publication, reaching more than 1 million subscribers, helping to really shape American Catholics' understanding of their own faith and keep them abreast of all the important news that was emerging, both in the local diocese, but also in the global church. Our Sunday Visitor is headquartered in the city of Huntington, which also, for a time, was home to a possible future saint.
Father Solanus Casey spent about maybe 10 years of his life at St. Felix Friary in Huntington, Indiana. At one time, St. Felix was a novitiate for the Capuchin order. Later in his life, when he was older, he was assigned there. We had a saint in our midst, and people of that Huntington community knew about him and would visit him. People from around the country would come and visit him. But a devotion grew up then after he died, and the cause for his canonization was introduced. And there's a Father Solanus Casey Guild in Huntington, and they were praying for his eventual beatification and canonization. So there was great joy in our diocese, especially in Huntington, when he was beatified a couple years ago.
In 1960, the Diocese of Fort Wayne was designated by the Vatican as the Diocese of Fort Wayne South Bend. And since then, the diocese has had 2 cathedrals, Immaculate Conception in Fort Wayne and St. Matthew's Co-Cathedral in South Bend. Immaculate Conception was dedicated in 1860, and though it has undergone various renovations throughout the years, it has remained standing as a beacon of faith for the faithful of the diocese for over 160 years.
The Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception was constructed under the direction of Father Benoit. As you walk down the center aisle of the cathedral, just as the nave ends and it meets the sanctuary and the altar, you'll see in the center aisle the grave of Father Benoit, inscribed with his name and the years of his life, since he was the one who constructed this edifice. The cathedral has incredible stained glass. It all comes from a Bavarian area in Germany. It was all made there and then shipped to the United States. The stained glass actually shows images from the life of Mary. Since the cathedral is dedicated to her under her title as Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, the most prominent stained glass window is behind the altar, and it does depict Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception. Mary's Immaculate Conception refers to her being conceived without the stain of original sin. And that's visually referenced in this image by her crushing the head of this snake as she stands on this orb. We proceed on to different images from her life, notably her betrothal to St. Joseph. Her parents, Joachim and Anna, are also featured prominently in that scene.
This is such a beautiful neo-Gothic cathedral. I love the architecture. The pillars here are original. Great sacrifices of those original pioneer Catholics. Most of them were French, German, and Irish immigrants. It's very historic. It's been beautified through the years. But the most important thing for me, besides the Blessed Sacrament being here and the altar, is the crucifix, because that was in the original St. Augustine Church. So that is from the very beginning, even before the cathedral was built. And I incense that crucifix after I incense the altar at the beginning of Masses when incense is used. And I always think about those Catholics who prayed before that crucifix when the church was just being established back in the 1830s here in Fort Wayne. Sometimes I love to just come over and pray in front of these beautiful Stations of the Cross. These are like my favorite Stations of the Cross. The word cathedral comes from the Greek and Latin, cathedra, which means chair. And it's really symbolic of the bishop's teaching and pastoral authority. And that's why he's the only one allowed to sit in it. So if another priest or the pastor here celebrates Mass, they have to sit in a different chair.
The cathedra inside the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception represents Bishop Rhoades' authority as the apostle of Fort Wayne, South Bend.
My mother was Catholic, a very, very strong, devout Catholic, a beautiful woman. She died pretty young. She was just 66 in 1994. My father was not Catholic, but he was very supportive of me. My father, it took him a while to adjust to the idea of me serving as a priest, but eventually he came around, and I'll always remember, because he was alive when I was ordained a bishop, and I remember his joy on that day. You know, mixed marriages weren't as common back then as they are now. They were married in 1950 in Mahanoy City. It wasn't real easy. You couldn't even be married in a church at that point. You got married in a rectory if it was a mixed marriage. But of course, my mother raised us as Catholic. It's interesting, my ethnic background, my mother's father was an immigrant from Greece, so he was Greek Orthodox. But her mother was Irish, very devout Catholic woman who actually lived with us when I was a child, because she was, until I was in 8th grade when she passed away. She was someone else very influential in my vocation, her devotion to Our Lady. But then that Greek part of me, it's really neat. I feel like an ecumenical person because I have Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant ancestors.
Kevin Rhoades grew up in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, where he was a member of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary Parish. After discerning a call to the priesthood, he enrolled in Mount St. Mary's College in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and then St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Overbrook. He did his theological studies at the North American College and the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome.
I remember with the election of John Paul II, he was young, he was just 58, he was vibrant. So there was a sense of, I would say, reinvigoration. When I went to Rome, he had been Pope just a year. It was that year in 1979 that he visited the United States the first time as Pope and visited St. Charles Seminary where I had been attending. So I missed the visit. But then that February of 1980, he came and visited the North American College. So that was the first time I got to meet him. He became my hero. I loved his teaching. I was formed, really, theologically and philosophically by John Paul II. Yeah, I was ordained on July 9th, 1983, ordained to the priesthood. I was ordained alone. My classmates in Harrisburg were ordained in April, but since I was in Rome, I wasn't ordained until July, and it was in my home parish church, St. Mary's in Lebanon. So that was the first time, and the Sacrament of Holy Orders was ever celebrated in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. I was an associate pastor at St. Patrick's in York, and I just loved it. The pastor gave me a couple of responsibilities. One was to help teach RCIA, to visit the parish school and teach religion a couple days a week, to be in charge of the parish youth group, actually to start one. I was also serving part-time in Hispanic ministry at another parish 1 day a week. And then there was a mission in Adams County near Gettysburg where the priests left and they had no priests. These were Mexican migrant workers, hundreds. So the bishop had no Spanish-speaking priests to send there, so he asked me to go. So I also spent 2 days a week going to serve the migrants in Adams County. They were there to work in the orchards. That really had a big impact on me too. It's the same church, it's the same Eucharist, whether it's celebrated in a magnificent cathedral or basilica like in Rome, or in a simple chapel among migrants in Adams County, Pennsylvania. To me, that's the beauty of the church. When I was assigned pastor at St. Francis Parish in Harrisburg, there were some who said, oh, it's the poorest parish in the diocese, sorry that you're having to go there. No, I was thrilled. You know, the people were beautiful. So yeah, we go where we are sent, and there's a peace in that.
After additional studies in Rome in canon law and dogmatic theology, Rhoades became an assistant chancellor of the diocese. In 1995, he accepted a full-time faculty position with Mount St. Mary's Seminary, where he taught courses on systematic theology, canon law, and Hispanic ministry, until being named rector 2 years later. On October 14, 2004, Pope John Paul II appointed Bishop Rhoades as the bishop of the Diocese of Harrisburg.
It did come as a big surprise when I received the call that Pope John Paul had appointed me Bishop of Harrisburg. I'll never forget it because I remember saying to the Apostolic Nuncio when he called on the phone, I'm only 46 years old. And he responded, well, we know how old you are. For me, I couldn't really say no because I wouldn't sleep well at night. You know, I feel like under obedience, I feel I would never say no to a call. So I remember going into the chapel at the Mount and praying at that point, kind of in shock. And then, you know, I was ordained a bishop on December 9th, 2004, which is the feast of St. Juan Diego, kind of going back to my service of the Mexican migrants. And I had devotion to Our Lady of Guadalupe, and being ordained on the feast of Juan Diego, then I started having devotion also to Juan Diego. So I think that was providential and significant as well. But when I became bishop, it was quite an adjustment. I think there were two things that really were the best preparation. Number one was I had been a parish priest. I had been a pastor. So I think that really helped. But secondly, being rector of a seminary, I had an experience of administration. And I think that also, that experience of leadership in priestly formation helped me as well.
On November 14, 2009, Pope Benedict XVI appointed Bishop Rhoades as the 9th bishop of the Diocese of Fort Wayne, South Bend.
I was really surprised when I received the call of being transferred to Indiana because I really was settled in Harrisburg 5 years. I was not anticipating a transfer. And I was really surprised of Fort Wayne, South Bend because I knew nothing. I had no connection to the diocese. I was always a Notre Dame fan. But other than that, I knew nothing about the diocese. I didn't know any priests here. I didn't know Bishop Darcy, my predecessor. It was all very, very new. We had no Catholic colleges in the Diocese of Harrisburg, and here there are 5 Catholic universities and colleges. I would say, though, from day one, I felt welcomed here. It was hard to say goodbye to family and friends. I remember moving out. It was hard, but you know, you don't get a lot of time to kind of process those emotions because, you know, I got installed and I had to get to work. I did the same thing where I traveled around the diocese to celebrate regional masses.
In the years since becoming bishop, Bishop Rhoades has worked to live out his apostolic mission as the chief shepherd of the diocese.
Well, I'm much more comfortable with my being a brother to the priests, but I'm also to be a father. And that means balancing those two is interesting. I never see myself as boss. It's like being a CEO of a company. And I would resist that kind of, because we're talking about really a spiritual reality. It's really important that we care for the spiritual life of our priests, their ongoing formation as priests, that we make sure that we help them in areas, and if they find themselves having some troubles, that we're there to assist them. One of its top 3 priorities now is helping Catholic parents raise their children. But if the example is not there in the home, not only going to church, but even catechesis in the home or prayer together as a family, most of those young people, whether they go to Catholic school or are in public school, they're going to stop practicing the faith. So we've got to do a lot more in parent education, and it's really formation and discipleship in the end. I mean, how many of our people are really being formed as disciples of Christ? Or are they just going through kind of more of a cultural thing, going through the sacraments, having some connection to the church, but not yet, as some speak of it, as not really intentional disciples? So it's kind of like we talk about the new evangelization, re-evangelization, whatever we want to call it, but it's really getting back to some of the basics. You know, this is the gift of the Holy Spirit. I mean, we're weak instruments. As a bishop, I kind of marvel at the fact that I've been called to this ministry, but I realize that even with my own weaknesses, my own imperfections, my own faults and sins, I must rely on the grace of Christ, which means being a man of prayer. It means going to confession. It means being devoted to the Holy Eucharist. And those are all essentials of the life of a priest as well.